Margaret stood in the bright kitchen of her new home watching as sunlight streamed through the cheerful yellow curtains she had hung just last week. The house still felt strange to her even after 3 months of marriage to Robert, but she was trying her best to make it feel like home. The hardest part was not the unfamiliar rooms or the different way Robert organized the pantry. It was learning to be a mother to 6-year-old Emma. Emma was a beautiful child with golden hair that caught the light and eyes the color of summer sky. But those same eyes held a wariness that broke Margaret's heart. The little girl had lost her mother 2 years ago, and Margaret knew that no matter how much love she offered, she could never replace what Emma had lost. She could only hope to earn a place beside that precious memory. This particular morning had started like so many others. Emma had come downstairs for breakfast, wearing her favorite red dress, the one with tiny white flowers that her biological mother had bought for her last birthday. The dress was getting too small, but Emma refused to let Margaret buy her a new one. She clung to it like a lifeline to happier days. Margaret had prepared Emma's favorite breakfast pancakes with real maple syrup and fresh strawberries. She had learned that Emma loved strawberries from Robert, who still marveled at how his daughter would eat them until her lips turned pink. But when Margaret set the plate down, Emma just stared at it with those solemn eyes. "Aren't you hungry, sweetheart?" Margaret asked gently, sitting down beside the little girl. Emma shook her head and pushed the plate away. "I want my real mommy to make breakfast." The words stung even though Margaret had heard variations of them many times before. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that grief had no timeline, especially for a child. "I know you miss her, honey. Your daddy has told me so many wonderful stories about your mommy. She must have made the most delicious breakfasts." "She made heart-shaped pancakes," Emma whispered, "and she would sing the good morning song." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She had been trying so hard to create new traditions with Emma, but perhaps what the child needed was to honor the old ones. "Would you like to tell me about the good morning song? Maybe you could teach it to me." For a moment, Emma's face brightened, but then she caught herself, and the walls went back up. "You're not my real mommy. You can't learn our song." Margaret nodded, understanding. "You're absolutely right. I'm not your real mommy, and I would never try to be, but I am someone who loves you very much, and I hope someday you might let me learn some of the special things that made you and your mommy happy." Emma didn't respond, but she did pick up her fork and take a small bite of pancake. Margaret considered that progress. The morning continued with the usual routine of getting Emma ready for school. Margaret had learned to lay out clothes the night before, because mornings were already emotional enough without wardrobe battles. She braided Emma's hair the way Robert had shown her, though she knew it wasn't quite as neat as when Emma's mother had done it. "Have a wonderful day at school," Margaret said, as she walked Emma to the bus stop. "I'll be here when you get home, and maybe we can bake those chocolate chip cookies you like." Emma climbed onto the bus without looking back, but Margaret waved anyway. She had learned that consistency mattered, even when it felt like her efforts went unnoticed. The day passed quietly. Margaret worked in her home office, answering emails and making phone calls for the marketing company she ran from home. She had deliberately chosen to work from home when she married Robert because she wanted to be available for Emma. She wanted to be the kind of parent who was there for scraped knees and forgotten homework, and all the little moments that made up a childhood. Around 3:30, Margaret heard the familiar sound of the school bus. She closed her laptop and went to greet Emma, hoping today might be different, hoping today Emma might run to her with stories about her day and friends and teachers. But Emma walked slowly up the driveway, her backpack dragging behind her and her face streaked with tears. Margaret's heart clenched as she hurried outside. "Emma, honey, what happened?" The little girl looked up at Margaret with eyes full of pain and anger. "Sarah Miller said you're not my real mom. She said real moms don't leave their kids, and that means my mommy didn't love me enough to stay." Margaret knelt down in front of Emma, her own eyes filling with tears. "Oh, sweetheart, that is not true. Your mommy loved you more than anything in the whole world. She didn't choose to leave you. She got very sick, and sometimes when people get very sick, their bodies stop working, even though their hearts are still full of love." "But Sarah said," Emma began. "Sarah doesn't understand. Margaret said gently. Some children are lucky enough to never lose someone they love, so they don't understand how much it hurts. When people don't understand something, they sometimes say things that aren't true or kind. Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve. I told her, "You're not my real mom," and she said that means I don't have a mom at all. The words hung in the air between them, and Margaret felt something break open in her chest. Here was the heart of it. Emma was caught between loving her mother's memory and accepting Margaret's presence. She was a little girl trying to navigate loyalty and love and loss all at once. "Come inside, honey," Margaret said softly. "Let's have some milk and cookies and talk about this." They walked into the kitchen together, and Margaret poured a tall glass of cold milk, while Emma climbed onto her favorite stool at the kitchen island. Margaret had bought these particular stools because they were just the right height for Emma to help with cooking and baking. She had hoped they might create opportunities for bonding. As Margaret reached for the milk carton, she noticed Emma watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something calculating in those blue eyes, something that made Margaret pause. "You know what Sarah said was mean?" Emma said suddenly, her voice taking on a tone Margaret had never heard before. She said that stepmothers are always mean in fairy tales. She said Cinderella's stepmother was terrible, and so was Snow White's. Margaret set the milk carton down carefully. "Well, fairy tales are just stories, Emma. They're not real life in real life. Stepmothers are just regular people who love their stepchildren very much." "Are you sure?" Emma asked, and there was something sharp in her voice now, something that made Margaret's stomach tighten. "Of course I'm sure, sweetheart." Emma slid down from her stool and walked around the kitchen island until she was standing very close to Margaret. "Sarah said I should test you," she said. "I should see if you're really nice or if you're mean like the stepmothers in stories." Warning bells began ringing in Margaret's mind, but she kept her voice gentle. "Emma, what kind of test?" Without warning, Emma grabbed Margaret's wrist and yanked. Hard. Margaret stumbled forward and the milk carton slipped from her other hand. The cold white liquid splashed across Emma's red dress, soaking the fabric and dripping onto the floor. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Emma stared down at her, ruined dress, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. Margaret stared too, her mind racing to understand what had just happened. Then Emma began to scream. It wasn't the cry of a hurt child, or even an angry child. It was a sound of pure anguish that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. She screamed as if the world was ending, as if everything she had ever loved was being torn away from her. "My dress," she sobbed. "You ruined my dress, my mommy's dress." Margaret reached toward her, but Emma jerked away. "Don't touch me, you're mean." "You're just like the fairy tale said, you hate me." Emma. "No, that's not," Margaret began, but the little girl was beyond hearing. "You did it on purpose." Emma screamed. "You wanted to ruin it because it was from my real mommy. You're jealous because I love her more than you." The accusations hit Margaret like physical blows. She stood there dripping with milk, her heart breaking as she watched Emma's pain pour out in great heaving sobs. The child was spiraling into a grief that was much bigger than a ruined dress, and Margaret felt helpless to stop it. "I hate you," Emma screamed. "I hate you. I hate you. I want my real mommy. I want you to go away." Margaret's own tears were falling now. She knelt down, trying to get to Emma's level, trying to find some way to reach through the storm of emotion. "Emma, please listen to me. It was an accident. I would never hurt something that was special to you." But Emma wasn't listening. She ran toward the stairs, still sobbing, still screaming that she hated Margaret and wanted her real mother. Margaret followed, but Emma slammed her bedroom door so hard the whole house seemed to shake. Margaret stood outside Emma's room, listening to the muffled sounds of crying and feeling like the worst person in the world. She pressed her forehead against the door and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." She went back to the kitchen and cleaned up the spilled milk, moving slowly, like someone in a dream. A white puddle on the floor seemed to represent everything she had done wrong, every way she had failed to understand what Emma needed. She mopped it up carefully, but she couldn't stop thinking about the look in Emma's eyes that moment when the milk hit her dress. Had Emma planned this, Margaret wondered, had the child deliberately caused the accident to test her reaction? The thought made her feel sick, but she couldn't shake it. There had been something so calculated in Emma's approach, something that suggested this wasn't spontaneous grief but orchestrated drama. But then Margaret remembered Emma's face when the milk actually hit her dress. The shock had been real. The pain had been genuine. Whatever Emma had,